I wanted to record this mini lecture on moral development since I won't be there on Thursday. And I want to start this off with a story. This is a true story. Many years ago, when my nephew was probably 6, 7 years old, something like that, I took him ice skating. And at the time, I was a graduate student, and I'd studied developmental psychology and was learning more about moral development. And we're skating around, and this little girl, as she's skating past us, she sort of slips and bumps into my nephew and knocks him down. And then she skates off. And he's mad, and he gets up and he just takes off after her. And so I go skating off after him, and I grab him, fortunately, before he gets to her. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going to go knock this girl down." And I said, "Why?" He's like, "Because she knocked me down." And I was like, "Oh, well, look, it was an accident. So I don't think you should go knock her down. She didn't mean to do it." And he seemed like he understood. And he's like, "Okay." And so I let him go, and he takes off after her again. So I go and I snag him again. And this time I take him off the ice. And I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to reason with this kid, and I'm going to make him see that knocking her down would be a bad idea." So I said, "Look, when she knocked you down, was it on purpose or on accident?" And he said, "It was on accident." And I was like, "If you go and knock her down, is that going to be on purpose or on accident?" He's like, "Oh, that's definitely going to be on purpose." I was like, "Well, what's worse, to knock somebody down on purpose or to knock them down on accident?" He said, "It's worse to knock them down on purpose." So he knew that. He had a moral sense that knocking someone down on purpose is worse than knocking them down on accident. I was like, "Right. It's worse to knock them down on purpose. And if you go knock her down, you're going to knock her down on purpose." He's like, "Right." And I'm like, "So that would be worse than what she did to you." He's like, "Yeah, that's true." And I thought he understood that he shouldn't do it. And so I said, "So when we go back out on that ice, what are you going to do?" He's like, "I'm going to hunt her down and I'm going to knock her down." So clearly my reasoning with his 6 or 7 year old mind just didn't work. And there's a reason for that. Moral development really follows cognitive development. And just like we talked about with cognitive development, little kids have a difficult time taking the other person's perspective. So the moral development that you see with little kids is mostly from their own perspective. They just know how they feel, and justice means that they feel good. And someone who makes them feel bad, even if it's on accident, has committed an injustice, and the world must be set right by getting revenge. So the main moral development in adolescence is the cognitive ability to take the perspective of somebody else. And once you can understand other people's perspectives, it makes you more empathetic and makes you more compassionate. So that's the main moral development that happens. Now, the interesting thing about moral development, beyond just sort of how it reflects cognitive development, is the way that people have studied it. So let's take a quick look at that. Piaget studied moral development, and that's not surprising because Piaget was studying cognitive development, and moral reasoning is a big part of cognitive development. And he had a weird way of studying it where he studied boys playing marbles. And what he noticed is that the kind of rules that boys use when they're playing marbles goes through stages. So at first, there is no structure to the game. It's just kids tinkering around playing with the marbles. And then somebody tells them the rules. And kids feel like when somebody tells them the rules of a game, and when their kids are little, you got to follow the rules. There's no bending the rules. The rules come from sort of this authority that is above you, and you got to follow the rules. And Piaget called this heteronomous morality. So you can see this, like if you ask a 5-year-old why they shouldn't steal a cookie, they'll tell you because their mom told them that they can't have one. And there's not really an understanding of what's wrong with stealing the cookie. There's just an understanding that there's a rule against it. And so the morality is really like, well, if there's a rule against it, then that's the rule. Later, as kids get a little bit older, 7, 8, 9 years old, there are these rules that kids understand but are not really willing to violate. And it's only as kids get into early adolescence that they realize that rules are socially constructed. This is just like understanding that just because one person says this is the rule, another person could come in and say, no, this is the rule is different. And so when you realize that people can have different perspectives on the rules, you realize that the rules themselves are constructed by people and can be modified. So if you can get other people to agree with you, you can change the rules of the game. And Piaget called this autonomous morality because now kids are actively involved in constructing the rules, and that's what autonomy means. So it goes from just doing what you're told to understanding that there's rules, but the rules can't be violated, to this late childhood, early adolescent phase of understanding that rules can be constructed and reconstructed if other people agree. That was Piaget's view. So Kohlberg comes along, and Kohlberg was a follower of Piaget. So he, like Piaget, is going to believe that moral reasoning is tied to cognitive development, and that moral reasoning, just like cognitive development, develops in stages. And so he used moral dilemmas to study the development of moral reasoning. And the most famous one is what is called the Heinz dilemma, where Heinz has a sick wife and there's a druggist in town that has made a drug that can cure his wife's disease, but it's very expensive. And Heinz has to figure out whether he should steal the drug or not. If he doesn't get the drug for his wife, she's going to die. But the pharmacist has already said, you got to pay full price for it. I can't just donate it to you. So should Heinz steal the drug? And he asked adolescents this. Well, he really asked adolescent boys this first. And he found that their reasoning follows these different stages, kind of like what Piaget said. So first, there is this level that he called pre-conventional, which you can see sounds a lot like Piaget's pre-operational stage. And this is this idea that you shouldn't steal the drug if there's a rule against stealing the drug. And then it gets a little bit more sophisticated and is just kind of focused on the self, which is, well, if you can steal the drug and not get caught, you should go ahead and do it. That is, again, from taking just the individual's perspective, not other people's perspective. So don't do it because it breaks a rule, or don't do it if you're going to get caught. But if you can do it without getting caught, then it's morally okay. The second stage is the conventional stage. And here there's two sub-stages. The good child morality is you don't want to break rules because you want to be seen as a good person. And maybe sometimes you need to break the rules if others will see you as a good person. So if Heinz will be seen as a bad person if he doesn't steal the drug, then he should steal it. If stealing the drug is going to make him seen as a bad person, then he shouldn't steal it. That's stage 3. Stage 4 is law and order morality, which is, look, Heinz has a good argument for stealing the drug, but we can't just let people start stealing because if we let people break the rules, then it's going to be chaos, and it's going to be sad for Heinz's wife to die if he doesn't steal the drug, but it would be worse to have society go off the rails if people just start stealing whenever they feel like they're entitled to it. So that is stage 4 of level 2. And then there's these post-conventional principled stages, which I won't really get into. But these are very high stages. So most people level out at stage 3 and stage 4. And what Kohlberg found when he started studying this with girls is that boys level out at stage 4 and girls level out at stage 3. Now, this is something that a lot of people have argued, that girls have lower levels of moral reasoning than boys. It's basically just kind of a sexist perspective. Piaget thought that. Kohlberg thinks that. Others of that sort of era in the early to mid 20s have argued that girls have a lower level of moral reasoning. Freud said that girls don't have castration anxiety, so they never develop the kind of moral compass that boys do. So a lot of sexist sort of ideas about girls being less moral in their reasoning than boys. So interestingly enough, here's some criticisms of Kohlberg and Piaget, and the main one is that it's sort of both of these are kind of sexist and might not accurately represent how girls really think about moral reasoning. I'll let you look at the slides for the other ones. So, at some point in the 70s, Kohlberg gets a grad student named Carol Gilligan, and Carol Gilligan looked at these sort of moral dilemmas that Kohlberg was using and was like, these are stupid. Nobody's ever going to be in one of these situations. Let's ask people to think about real moral dilemmas. So she developed her own dilemmas, and she started using them with adolescent girls and young women. And the moral dilemma that she came up with, or one of them, was that there's a woman who's pregnant and is considering getting an abortion. Now, I remember back in the 70s, this was when abortion was not legal, and people were going and getting illegal abortions. And I can't believe we're sort of back to that state in some stages, but things evolve, I guess. In any case, she came up with this dilemma, and she gave it to boys and gave it to girls, and she found this. She said that girls and boys aren't at different moral levels, that instead girls and boys just think about morality in different ways, and that girls are more inclined, because of their socialization, to try and find a solution that kind of works for everybody. That if there's going to be some major conflict that comes out of this game, it's better to just dissolve the game and find something new than it is to be arguing over the rules. Boys, she argued, are more inclined to come up with kind of these standards of morality that are less concerned with individual relationships and social relationships, and girls are more inclined to think about morality as maintaining social relationships where everybody can feel good about what the decision is if there's a conflict. So she just said girls have a different voice, a different moral lens that they use. Girls, she said, have an ethic of care, whereas boys develop an ethic of justice. And neither one of these is a higher level of moral reasoning. They're just different concerns due to different socialization processes. Major controversy over her research. Not really clear that boys and girls really do reason very differently. And people who tried to replicate her research found that boys and girls kind of argued the same things in their answers to these dilemmas. And when somebody asked her for her data, which you're supposed to keep your data so that other people can examine it, she said that she lost it. So a little bit of a taint there, but in her research and in her argument. But I still find it a compelling argument. You can decide whether you do. Okay, so again, the main issue that develops in adolescence is the ability to take other people's perspectives. And this really changes the way that people think about moral issues. It's also important to notice that not everybody gets to a stage where they are really thinking about other people. Some people, even as adults, are really primarily focused on themselves and feel like, I'm going to steal this thing if I want it. As long as I can get away with it, I don't see anything wrong with it. So it's not like everybody reaches higher levels of moral reasoning. And it's also not the case that if you can reason at a sophisticated level morally about some issues, you'll reason at a high level of moral development for all issues. So you can be super selfish, for example, when it comes to something like, I don't know, taking the last piece of cake. And you can be really empathetic and take other people's perspective when it comes to some argument about like whether it is bad to cheat on a test or cheat on a partner or something like that. So we might use different levels of moral reasoning for different specific situations. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the academic cheating stuff. You can read that if you'd like to. I'm not going to talk about the character education. There's a reading by Alfie Kohn that is an optional reading, which you're welcome to read. He argues that we shouldn't be trying to teach character education because we shouldn't be imposing our values on other people. But you can read that article if you'd like and see what you think about that. Here are some of his criticisms of moral education or character education. These are the things that try and build students' character in school. He is not into it, and you can decide whether you agree with him or disagree with him. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, to be honest. I think he has got interesting points, but isn't necessarily right. All right, so here's the take-home message. Moral development is basically a subsection of cognitive development. So as we develop the ability to think abstractly and take other people's perspectives into account, it changes the way that we morally reason. Moral reasoning and moral behavior are really two different things. There are so many examples where people know what is right, but they don't act in ways that they should. So we know we should share, but we don't always share. We know that we should take care of those who are less able to take care of themselves, but for a lot of reasons, we don't always want to do that. So knowing what's right and doing what's right are very different things. And just because you know doesn't mean that you're going to do it. We often think about what adolescents can't do, and it's good to think about their strengths and what adolescents can do, especially how their moral reasoning is more sophisticated than children's moral reasoning is. More than children, adolescents are able to justify their beliefs and rationalize their behaviors. So they're better able to understand the gray areas and the situational factors at work. Good example of this is if you ask a kid in second or third grade, is it okay to cheat on a test? They'll just say, no, it's not okay to cheat on a test. You shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean they won't do it. Sometimes they'll be tempted to look at their neighbor's paper, but they'll tell you, no, you never should. An adolescent is likely to give a more nuanced answer to that. Like, well, it's not usually okay to cheat on tests, but if the test is unfair or ridiculously difficult, or you really need to pass the test to get something else that's important in life, then maybe it can be okay to cheat. Or what if everybody else is cheating and you're the only one who's not cheating? Then you're at a disadvantage. So adolescents are really able to think about the context. They're able to think about these multiple factors. And so it's really an interesting time for moral development. Just the sophistication of their thinking is something to take note of. All right. That's it for the little mini lecture. I hope that it is helpful.